everyone. I'm John, a designer, and I'm joined with Ken, who's a product manager, as well as Tony and Jared here, who are developers at VMware, to talk about why we think reliability is such an important aspect of making a great app. So Jared, what is reliability?
I look at reliability as a measurement of how long an app runs failure-free or close to that in a specific environment over an amount of time. I think it's important that you recognize that things are going to go wrong and that your team should plan for that. And the things you do depend ultimately on the type of application you're building. So, Tony, in terms of a web application, what are some of the examples of failures that could happen?
A few things that come to mind are any stories dealing with inputs or outputs. Think validating user data or what should take place if an item isn't found. Something closer to feature development could be implementing pagination or some kind of loading screen. Jonathan, how would you communicate with users when things go wrong?
Well, you don't get points for making a reliable experience, but you can certainly lose points, right? So how can we avoid losing points? I think it's helpful for users to understand the actual state or status of a system. So clearly communicating that to people, I think, is really important. Of course, you can offer alternatives or next steps, right? Like trying submitting again or coming back later, sending an email to somebody. But I think beyond telling users, I think it's also important to have the feedback coming in as well. So I would say that designers should always try to work with devs and be aware of how the system is functioning, and have access to those reports and things that show how often problems are happening and what kind of an impact that's having on the user experience. Ken, from a product management perspective, what does reliability mean to you?
Yeah, I think not just what the users are experiencing inside of the application, but also I think reliability goes hand in hand with resilience, meaning how quickly can we recover from an adverse situation and get our application back up and running. So a few things that I'm thinking about there are how can we design experiments so that we can get very good at getting an application back up and running. A few things that I'm measuring or thinking about in designing those experiments are how often are we deploying that application to a production environment? And when we do, how long does it take? What's the lead time to get from our keyboards to our users' keyboards, if you will? And then the last couple pieces of that are when we make those deployments, how often are they failing? And when they fail, how quickly can we get them back up and running? What's that mean time for us to restore the application? If we can get really good as a team at recovering from those adverse situations, then I think we're in a much better spot to reduce our risk, cost, and waste by reducing those points that we're losing, like you mentioned, Jonathan, as much as possible. Jared, I'd be curious, what are some other things that you might be measuring in regards to reliability from an engineering perspective?
Sure, Ken. In terms of regular failures that happen, bugs, I would look to use some type of error tracking software that catches and aggregates those errors to some central service and then checking that at some regular interval, maybe weekly or monthly, to see how your numbers are. For slowness, you could look at performance testing tools to measure your request and response, find any potential bottlenecks in your system. And then maybe at the extreme edge, extreme failures, I would look into maybe something like chaos testing to see how the software responds to losing like a critical piece, such as a database. But tools do exist for doing all of that, so you shouldn't have to hand roll anything. So Ken, after a team has decided to focus on reliability, how do you effectively balance the trade-offs between reliability and feature development at the project level?
Yeah, I think recognizing reliability as a trade-off is the first piece to that conversation. And with that, you need to understand your users well enough to empathize with them so that you can effectively prioritize adding new features that address their pains versus making the application incredibly reliable. If you overswing to reliability, you're probably missing out on opportunities to improve the lives of your users. So you need to make sure that you bring the balance team along for that conversation, and really start there to make an effective decision that will stick, that is deliberate. And that's really, I think, the most important thing right there is that conversation that you're having amongst the balance team about reliability. But Tony, I'd be curious, what do you want people to walk away from this conversation with today?
Yeah, I think one of the most important points to walk away with is good software is reliable software. And to reemphasize one of the points you've made, be sure your entire team is regularly discussing, developing, and designing for when things can go wrong.
Yeah, Tony, thanks for that message. I think that's spot on. And thanks everybody for joining us today.